there's a problem with that, is that if somebody makes a really bad experience in their VR headset, gives it to somebody as their first VR experience ever, and that person gets immediately sick, they assume it's because VR is just really, really not for me. That's we hear this all the time when you test VR or you talk to people about it, like, oh yeah, I tried it, but it's not for me. I get sick. And the thing is that probably they don't, but they did have a really bad experience to either a really bad game or a really bad headset.
Keep it nerdy. Keep it nerdy. Keep it real, real nerdy. Nerdpreneur, you know I love my work. Life's a game, so I'ma take my turn. Nerds deserve to put their passion first. Let them rap a verse so they can all be heard.
Yeah, my nerdy passion basically is drawing.
Correct. I'm a breeder of tarantulas, importing tarantulas and some other critters.
I am a harpist. I do mainly Celtic harp, video game songs, songs from nerdy TV shows.
Obviously, I'm big on Star Trek.
It is creature design, fantastical biological creations out of watercolor.
We are dice retailers.
Nerdpreneur, you know I love my work. Life's a game, so I'ma take my turn. Nerds deserve to put their passion first, so let them rap a verse so they can all be heard.
Welcome to Nerdpreneur, where we have fun conversations with people making money with their nerdy passion. As always, I am joined by my co-host Frank.
Hello.
And today we have a very special guest. His name is JJ from Mythical City Games. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, nice to chat with you here and get to see you again, Frank.
So JJ, what is your nerdy passion?
So Mythical City Games is a video game development studio based out of Vancouver, Canada. And so it's something that started originally as another company in the States, and then I moved to Canada and moved everything up there. But I came from a background of film production, film development, and then eventually found a way to take all of that skill and all that kind of interest in creation and that kind of that sort of creative mindset and turn that into games and sort of get an interesting, different perspective on creating something cool.
And when you're running this Mythical City Games, now I'll give context to how we know each other in a little bit, but I kind of want to first start off with diving just briefly on the surface level into what it is that you're doing at Mythical City Games, and what is it that your responsibilities typically are? Like, are you coding? Are you running the business? Are you doing the visual assets?
Yeah, so Mythical City Games, we focus on game development, and over the last few years, it's been a focus on virtual reality games. But we also do have PC games, and we've done some stuff on mobile as well. And so me, as the founder, CEO of the company, I kind of do a mix of everything, mostly management and business development. Also, on the creative side, coming up with the ideas for games, projects, kind of my creative spin on the games that we create. I do a fair amount of coding as well, and that kind of depends on the size of the project. If it's like a little prototype or something like that, I may do a lot of it myself. Or it's a small game that maybe we're funding ourselves internally, then I may take a bigger portion of the coding side. If it's a bigger project, we've got several developers on it, like a bigger team, then I may do a much smaller part and my job becomes much more about management. I'm not really on the visual side at all, so that's not my expertise in terms of graphics and UI and creating marketing materials, things like that. So that I leave to the experts.
So you've got a little bit, at least a little bit of an understanding in a lot of areas, but you leave a lot of, say, the final polished versions of some 3D models to people who do that as their area of expertise, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in terms of 3D modeling, I don't even touch it really. It's something that I never got into personally, and I have enough other things to kind of focus on that I'm better at. So I'd rather do that. In terms of like polish, though, I find that like let's if you look at the coding side, or maybe even like promotional materials or something, there may be an element of that where I do kind of like a final pass on something. So for code, it's sometimes easier for me to just because I understand it well enough to do a quick fix or touch it up myself or to make a quick change myself rather than relying on the experts to kind of to do that. So because it's a very small studio and small teams, that I'm involved in kind of the all the parts of the production in some way.
Sure. The final pass of it all.
So yeah.
You got to be dynamic in small teams, right? And video games in general take a lot of different things to get them off the ground, from the ideas and the big picture strategies around gamifying them to the coding to actually making it look good to then marketing it. And you guys have a small, you mentioned, team. Maybe one of the things I think is really unique about talking to you, and one of the reasons we want to talk to you, is the virtual reality component to what you do. And I'm curious because that's a very unique sort of nerdy passion, is virtual reality. Could you maybe give a little indication just for some people who may not even know, when we just say virtual reality games, like how is that different from just a regular video game if people are just used to playing Xbox or PS5?
Or even mobile game, because I feel like mobile game is like the largest market. Everyone's probably tried at least one mobile game in their life.
Yeah. So what's a virtual reality game versus a regular game?
Yeah, so a VR game is something that you have to wear a VR headset for. So something like this here. So a lot of people have probably tried that in VR arcades or kind of public places or friends' places. So it's something that you wear, and then that allows you to be fully immersed in a virtual environment. And so the big difference is that the game isn't just happening in front of you on a flat screen, is that the game's happening all around you in every direction, and that your body is now a controller for the game rather than an actual controller or buttons somewhere. So the amazing thing about it is, even though it seems a little bit kind of scary at first, maybe, or something, it's like, oh my god, I gotta put this thing on and everything. The cool thing about it is that it allows pretty much everybody to participate in a game, as opposed to a more physical game. Or the extreme would be maybe console games, where trying to get a non-gamer to understand a controller and all the 100 buttons practically that are on there and how to do something with that is really, really hard. It's a huge barrier of entry for a lot of people. And in virtual reality, if you know how to pick something up in the real world, you pretty much know how to pick it up in VR. So because you use your arms, you use your hands, and you use your body. If you want to look somewhere, you look somewhere. If you want to look under the table, you actually kneel down and like look under the table. But in a regular video game, and like a mobile game, try explaining that to like your grandparents, how to like look under the table with a controller, right? If they've never played before. I mean, good luck.
Yeah, not super intuitive. You got to press X. And I just remember like me playing Mortal Kombat and trying to figure out any of the finishing moves. I am terrible at patterns and things and just remembering them. And then X, maybe it's a distance from my brain to my fingers, but I was terrible at all those fast movement, like fighting games. So whereas like, I used to take karate. So if you put me in a VR headset, maybe I could actually fight in a Mortal Kombat setting.
That's an interesting point about like how VR ties into accessibility. I hadn't thought about this very much, and I'd be curious what your thoughts are, JJ. But I remember seeing how companies like Xbox were doing a lot to make console games more accessible. So they were creating controllers for people with different motor disabilities or motor skills. And with VR, sometimes you have to use the buttons on the controllers, but like you said, sometimes it's just as simple as ducking down. I think of a very popular VR game, Beat Saber, where you don't have to use the buttons. I don't think. You just use the controllers and you wave them around like lightsabers, and you duck and you move and you step around, and there's less fine motor control, but I mean, maybe Beat Saber is not a great example, but having, like you said, your body is a controller.
Mhm.
That's very cool.
There is a
That
range of of games, but also experiences. In a lot of games, there's also a range of kind of accessibility options and ways you can kind of make it a little bit more accessible. But but it really does depend completely on the type of game or experience that it is, and you can create stuff that is accessible in I would say a wider way than with controllers, because I mean it comes down
Right.
to a screen, and controllers still has those limitations. You need to get input into it somehow. You still have to be able to press a button, even if the controller is in a different setup. But with VR, I mean, especially with VR headsets that can read eye movements as well, that's all you need is if you can move your eyes. Even if you don't have access to other motor skills, um, at least your eyes can actually select things. You can actually, I mean, looking at the new Vision Pro headset from Apple, the primary kind of input system really is your eyes in that. And that's incredibly accessible.
It's mind blowing. You actually touched on some vocab that I think we should elaborate on, which is VR experience versus VR game. I've noticed you kind of like select those two terms carefully already. And I was hoping you could just briefly explain the difference between those two.
Sure. So VR is kind of a wide area you can explain. So I mean, VR ranges from things like games experiences where you have a goal, you have a something that you need to achieve in it. You're getting kind of like a result out of it, like a score or something like that. Versus an experience where you're just there and there's no particular necessarily goal. You don't have to achieve anything, and you may not get a result kind of out of it, but you get to, for example, take a walk in a forest would be like a VR experience. Or a lot of people may be familiar with the underwater VR experience. It lets you kind of walk around or float around underwater almost and see what life is like there without having to go scuba diving. Um, but there's also a huge other side of VR experiences, or VR is enterprise or business VR. So things like training systems in VR, business applications in VR, real estate in VR, all of this stuff that's a huge other industry. That's not a game.
Thank you. Now, I want us to go back a little bit here. We've dived into some really what I mean, I love this stuff. I get really nerdy talking about video games, especially VR, because it feels so cutting edge. But I'd like to go back in your story. And you had talked about you did photography and then you started a studio. I'd like to zone in on that transition briefly of how you went from doing photography as a business and it was a side hustle, right? That where you were turning into like your main form of income, the photography side of things.
So no, it was film production.
Oh, sorry.
So I did film. I did some photography, but not professionally. Film. So I worked in the film industry for a while, and so that was my primary career, and that was what I went to school for. And then I transitioned from that into games.
How did you make that change? It seems similar, but also quite different.
one doesn't require coding, and now you are doing
Yeah.
lots of coding, and it sounds like a lot more complicated than just point and shoot. You went from like analog to completely digital. So, yeah,
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Well, the I guess I'll touch upon the differences, maybe how it's not that different after, but the transition for me was I lived in I was in LA working in film there for a while, and then I moved to a city that didn't really have a very big film industry, and it was a great place to live, but the film industry was much smaller, and I ended up not really doing all the kind of stuff. I was getting more into commercials and kind of um, things that weren't as kind of creative, I guess, for me of an outlet. So I was starting to have this creativity decrease a little bit, and I had more time a little bit on my hands too, and So I always had an idea for a game, and I thought, okay, well, how about I try to create something over weekends and nights a little bit while just to see if I could do it. Um, and at the same time, the App Store had kind of recently come out from
Apple's
Apple.
App Store?
Apple's
Or
App Store, yeah, it was kind
okay.
of getting started, and the iPad had just come out, and I thought, okay, the iPad is actually a great interface for this game that I've always wanted to make, but I was scared of looking into it, or the programming side, where I was like, okay, this is going to require an education in programming, and or I'm going to have to hire somebody super expensive. There's no way I'm going to be able to do this. So I never even attempted making a game, even though I had this idea for a game for quite a long time. And then so at the same time, with kind of like the accessibility of the App Store, some of the game development tools that were getting much stronger right around that time too, that were accessible to everybody. um, and so that kind of, and plus this kind of need to create something, be much more creative than what I was doing in my day job. That's what kind of pushed me to give it a try to see if I could do this. Um, Now the differences between film and games, I would say, is it's not that much. Like the production process is quite similar. You kind of come up with the idea, or like, it's not necessarily exactly a script in a game, but it's that same process of kind of writing down your kind of the outline of the whole idea. How's the whole game gonna work? There's the production of kind of the development of it. So this would be like out on set filming, and which is a very technical process also. Um, and then there's kind of like a post-production part where you're kind of like putting everything together, and adding the music, adding all the kind of the final art and all these things. So those things are kind of the same, and then after you finish it, you have to get it out there and sell it, or get somebody to watch or play it somehow. So I translated really, really well from one to the other. The programming part, that was the only kind of like, okay, there was like a little technical blip that was required there, is to
Just a
do
little
actual
thing to
coding.
learn how to program.
Just learn how to program.
But if you'd
So
already taught yourself a lot of the technical aspects of filmmaking, and that's a lot of what I do now. We didn't talk about that, but I do a lot of video work now. So that's interesting how when you and I started working like together, what was that? It's about 8 years ago was when you and I met. And now I'm doing similar things to what you did. Anyway, that's funny to me. But the aspect of the pre-production, how similar that is, the ideas of pre-production, production, and post-production, and you're able to take that understanding. It gives you it sounds like that would have given you a nice foundational understanding of how to get a project from ideation to publication. And what was the game? I'm dying to know what your first game was after that story.
yeah, so that was a Battlefleet, the first Battlefleet. So there's now 3 games in the series, but that was the first one, and it was for iPad first. It was an iPad game, so that was kind of what prompted it. Originally, when I designed the game, it was like a pen and paper kind of game that I used to play in university, and then I thought, yeah, it'd be a great fit for an iPad experience.
Now, this is like a based in World War II Normandy style game, just to give people a little bit. I mean, Battlefleet could be anything. It could be a space game, could be a it could be anything. But this is a World War II game specifically about Normandy and the invasion, right? Like a European grounded in that world.
Yeah, it's a World War II naval strategy game based in the Pacific, so not Normandy, but
Oh, okay,
Japanese
sorry.
and U.S. Ships. It's a top-down turn-based strategy game.
So I guess I was looking at Ground Assault. That's like a newer version of it on your website. So that one is in Normandy, but maybe the original one was the Pacific. I had a question about, you just said you went from film to learning how to code. Did you go to school for coding, or did you just like figure it out on your own, or like where did you go? YouTube videos? How did you learn how to code?
YouTube, pretty much.
Self-taught.
At the time, it was completely YouTube. So I read some books, but they were like game design books about like the concepts behind it. Game or programming books are like the devil. Those should all have been burnt.
Yeah.
Because they kill the desire to want to program. And I remember in high school. I think I looked at one of those. Maybe I had taken, no, I don't think there was even really like a programming class, but I played around a little bit with those books, and they just turned me off the idea so much. And I think they turn people off programming the way that it's set up. So
What do you remember? What YouTube video or YouTube channels really made a difference for you specifically?
no, so it was basically like what I followed was two different kind of things. One was um a long YouTube series that was about this guy making an RPG game and programming it. And so he started from the very beginning, like episode 1, and this was like, I don't know, 100 episodes of this or something. It was really, really long. And he really just he showed you all the code that he was doing. So there was this where you kind of followed some other project, and it was less of a direct tutorial, but you saw all the code and how he was doing it. So, and he explained things pretty well. And then the second type of thing was like very specific tutorials, like make a snake game or make a space 2D shooter or something like that. And those ones where you just followed and you create what they were creating. And so I started with kind of those things. The little tutorial projects were great because there was just like a few episodes or maybe even just one video, and by the end of it you had like a little mini game, and it was great to give you kind of a boost and get you going really fast. And then the long series was great because he went into like much more details of like what a real game needs, because a lot of those little tutorials were like, okay, this is for some little tiny game, but it's not going to be something like a production game that you're going to ship. But his game that he was working, I don't know if this guy ever finished it, but his was like a real RPG game. So it had kind of good programming. It had good code practices he was teaching you, things he was telling you to do that, that made you think about, okay, how is this going to work in much more complex systems of a full game.
Well, game design itself is a complicated thing from, the ground up. It's not just about making something, say, visual go on the screen and look cool. It's also about creating that interface that works for humans. You're really creating something that helps humans interact with something digital and a concept and keep it engaging. You mentioned reading some books on game design, and I'm sure we got some people who might be listening to this who are thinking, man, I really want to learn how to build my own games. Could you give just what were the maybe like
the least soul-sucking books?
Or were there any good books that people should read? And also, what were the most important lessons what were the first lessons you should learn if you want to be a game designer?
Well, I don't remember any of the actual titles of the books, so this was quite a while ago. But and also the thing is, there's new ones coming out all the time that, because game design and game development is such an evolving art form, that unlike film, where we were watching movies, like in film class, we were
Citizen
studying
Kane,
films from the 40s and 30s and all this stuff, right? And because a lot of that's still applied, a lot of the game design principles, there's still a lot of really great ones you can take away from games like Mario or something. There's not a lot of great ones you can take away from Pong or or some of these games. So that are going to apply really that well as opposed to like a more modern game. So I would say looking up what are the new books these days is probably a better idea for that.
So what are some of the lessons what were the first lessons you learned about game design that were helpful for you in creating your own game?
I think one of the things that was it's hard to do at first for some people maybe is testing or getting other people to test it very early, because you're kind of really afraid of somebody saying this sucks right away, like it's your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not ready, or like it looks like crap at this point and it's just a bunch of cubes, and you're like, but try it. And so you have to have somebody you really trust kind of to be able to do that, but really being able to test on people really early and get feedback as soon as possible, and letting go of that, and also understanding that, okay, if someone says this sucks or something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it does. It's just maybe they're not into it, it's not their thing. But building up that skill of how to get feedback and how to deal with the feedback and how to actually parse the feedback that people give you. I think that's something that you can always use for a game and for lots of things, for film, for any kind of creative pursuit.
Feedback is a great it's such a really important thing, and we've heard this from a couple other people we've spoken to. One of our first interview was with a board game designer, and he talked about feedback too. And this was a while ago. This was about 2 years ago that we spoke with him. So I'd like to know, for when you're looking for people to give you feedback on a game, like what kind of qualities, maybe they've got an understanding. Do you look for people who have understanding of code, or do you look for people who have understandings of like this type of game, or people who just have like, they don't care about a World War II naval strategy game, but you're going to throw them into it anyway? Like, what kind of people do you look for to give you feedback?
Definitely not on like kind of the technical side, really. I think that's a little less critical. Um, More important is on the feel and the understandability also of what you're trying to get across in the game. So how to play the game, trying to get that, because the game is never as simple to play and understand as you think it is. And people will always, even the most experienced gamers are always going to be immediately confused by what you show them,
That's what
until you
tutorials are for.
get it good. Yeah.
The scaffolding and
Yeah,
onboarding, right?
yeah, that's a whole other topic. So yeah, so I think the two kinds are, yeah, people that are in the niche or in the genre, like the genre that the game is about, so that they can give you a little bit more higher or level, or not higher level, but they can give you feedback that is more appropriate to that game genre a little bit, and they understand the patterns, and they can also give you ideas or things that they've seen in a game in that genre if they're really into it that you might have not seen yet. So if this is a World War II turn-based strategy game, is definitely strategy fans. So that's one side to give you really great, unique feedback for this. But there is also just the regular audience and just getting regular people to try stuff out, with the understanding that, okay, they may not know some of these standard concepts. So they may not understand how a mini map works, maybe in an RTS, or they may not play turn-based games, so they may not know they have to end the turn, or so that, and then you just have to take that kind of understand that feedback, that okay, if someone's like, yeah, but I don't know how to move around the map, or what the mini map is, well, okay, then that your audience will, if they've played strategy games, but this person may not, but that has limits also. So I mean, like, if you have a first person shooter you're making and you give it to somebody who's never played a first person shooter, doesn't know how to use a controller, doesn't know how to, even with a mouse and keyboard, how to look around and move, that doesn't have the dexterity control built in of your two different hands, doing different things, then that feedback is mostly not going to be useful, really. I mean, if somebody is so far out of that,
They're just going to
out of
say,
that
I'm
genre.
overwhelmed. And there's not
Yeah.
a lot you can do for that person if they're not really your target
No,
audience too.
if they can't get past the how do I actually do anything in your game, how do I control anything, then they're not going to really be able to give you much feedback. You can maybe show them the game and like have them watch it and see if they can figure out something that you want to ask them about. But this was something that was really interesting. I just want to touch about it from a virtual reality perspective, that what was really different in VR versus other games is that there kind of was no limit to the person. Well, firstly, I was starting VR when there was no really other VR games out yet. So it was right in 2016 when the mainstream of VR was getting started. And so there was nobody had any VR experience really that you would ask. Nobody had played VR, especially with like controllers and kind of the 6 degrees of field, that kind of what we talk about for modern VR. And so what was really cool is like just getting anybody into the experience, because it was a level playing ground. Everyone was like new to this experience. It wasn't, so I took like my mom to try VR, and she has no gaming experience, no interest in regular games or video games. I don't think she ever played Battlefleet. But throwing her into a prototype of Snow Fortress, which was one of our first VR games, and it was barely anything was made in this, but seeing that she could understand how to play this game and got inspired and had a fun time out of it, then I saw the potential of VR. But it also kind of like showed me that the way you treat feedback and the way you treat kind of who's this for and who can access a certain platform is really different from platform to platform, and things can really change like this.
I was watching a podcast with a board game designer, the guy who created Exploding Kittens, which was one of the top ever Kickstarter games or whatever. And he was talking about making great board games, always having a sort of mechanism of fun that you have to figure out really works. And people pitch him games all the time, and most of them just don't have that mechanism dialed in. And that's why they don't get funding, or they just don't go anywhere, or they create the game and it sucks. So I'm curious, from a video game or say a VR perspective, you just talked about your mom having fun, I'm assuming throwing snowballs in this snow fortress game. Is there a mechanism that for fun that you have to like discover, or is it something you go in knowing, okay, this is the mechanism of fun that we have to get to, and just optimize for within the game? Is there a strategy that way?
Usually you have an idea for what you think that will be, or a direction of like it's sort of the core loop of the game, you could say.
Okay.
So you kind of have an idea of that. Sometimes the idea is right, but you need to tweak it, to kind of get it to that really good loop where it is fun the whole way around. But sometimes you're completely wrong. And through playtesting and discovery and experimentation, you do find that actual thing. So a lot of times you'll go into a project and you'll be like, you know what, this is going to be the fun part of the game. And then you do something, or you watch players do something else, and you're like, huh, that's actually, they seem to really love doing that thing, but I want them to be doing like this part that I made the game about. And then you have to realize, okay, well, maybe the game's really not about this thing that you wanted. It's really more about this thing they're actually having a lot of fun doing.
Do you have an example with Snow Fortress? Because a little bit of context about what Snow Fortress is, from what I understand, is you build forts out of snow, and sometimes you start on levels with a snow fort, and you're trying to take down these bots that are trying to get you. And so you have to use your fort for defense. You have to attack them back. Was there something because there's Snow Fortress 2 now, which I know very little about, but in Snow Fortress 1, was there something there that you thought, hey, this is the main fun factor? And then eventually you discovered, you know what, people really like something else.
No, I mean, that's an example of a perfectly designed game. So
I feel like, yeah, I feel like there might have been something around fort building or something that people could have enjoyed. People love building stuff.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, well, the one thing we discovered is um, people are really anal about putting things exact, making things really exact. So in the game, you build a fort out of blocks of snow. So they're kind of cubes or shapes, square shapes. And you don't have to stack them in any particular way. They don't have to be perfectly lined up for it to work. But people spend a hell of a lot of time just moving it like in a little centimeter this way, a little centimeter this way to line up these blocks perfectly, even when there's like a timer running out and they haven't even finished their fort. I don't know if that's necessarily like a sign of, okay, they enjoy that, but I've noticed that in humanity in general is not for everybody, but there is some
There's
issue
Minecraft
there.
players out there that are just going nuts for it, I bet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. There was definitely stuff we learned and we tweaked towards a certain direction of what people were doing, to have kind of more fun versus the original idea. Um, but in general, it was kind of still the original concept of building the fort. I think the fort building was actually less at that point. It wasn't something as big to the actual fun of the game as we thought it might be. So I think it turned out to be much more the snowball throwing, especially the slingshot. So there's like a slingshot, and you get to load it with snowballs. That people really really loved. So kind of focused a little bit more of the gameplay on that.
Yeah, that just sounds like it would be way more fun to be able to throw snowballs and do all that kind of thing.
Get power ups to throw more snowballs or bigger snowballs. And,
Yeah.
when it's a game about our team versus your team. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to. So there's a couple other things I would like us to talk about in our time with you. One is the industry of the VR industry, because it's still quite young. But then I'd also like to talk about, after that, when we lay the groundwork of kind of where the industry is, talk about funding and how that works. Because when you're not a big, actually, even when you are a big studio, from what I understand, you still have to get funding from somewhere, whether you're going to make somebody else's game. In the case of Baldur's Gate 3, because everyone knows that game, Larian Studios was hired by Wizards of the Coast, a publishing company, and Larian is the studio that made it. And they got money from Wizards of the Coast. They didn't just have this money and say, "Hey, Wizards of the Coast will make this game." So a studio, and I know I'm oversimplifying a lot, JJ. So correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong. But as far as where funding comes from, that's critical for a project. You need that life force, that blood, that money, essentially, for the whole body of the business to function. So before we get to that, though, because I think talking about the industry, I asked a series of questions on Reddit to people in the VR space, and was just saying, "Hey, people who play the game, what do you think the industry's like right now? Do you have high hopes for it? Where has it been? Like, do you enjoy the games? Do you feel like there's a lot of enthusiasm around it?" And I got some interesting feedback. One person, one VR gamer, Gandalf the Bee on Reddit, said, "For VR to really succeed, it just needs to be pushing more games and updates on their games." And given that you are making games and that there's updates like that, and I feel like you are aware of competition and you're aware of what the users enjoy because you see what games succeed, what do you think of that assessment? Do you think there needs to be more games with more updates for people to stick around, for VR to succeed?
Basically, I feel like the question under the question there is like people saying, VR games need to be better. They need more updates, need more of them, and they aren't necessarily there yet. Is kind of the underlying feeling to that question, the sense of it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a mix of feedback about the industry. There's good hopes, and there's also people who think along these lines. So kind of it's hard to tell really where it's going.
Yeah, where's the industry at right now?
Yeah, so it is a kind of an up and down part of the game business, virtual reality these days. I mean, or it has been for the last few years. We went through a huge hype cycle and up and down with that. And it's kind of become a little bit more of a stabilized area, but still needing some support and like injection of funding and things like that to get it really going. So it's still, it's stable-ish, but it could still falter. So we've seen some really good moves from like the big VR companies like Meta and Pico to really push for new games, keep pushing new hardware. Now we see Apple coming up with VR hardware, which they are refusing to call VR, but they've made a VR headset. And so there is this kind of good support still, and there is still games being funded and produced. But I think, like a lot of gamers, you'll see, or people are talking about, is that there is still one of the things that drive kind of console sales are like the big games. the Switch was sold on some of those big games like Breath of the Wild or these like mega games. It wasn't on the really amazing, cool indie games that came out after and followed and like pushed the console to what it is now. But to get people to get it in the first place, I think that's just kind of the way the game industry works, is people want to get it because some amazing huge experience is on there. And so far we've had Half-Life Alex, which was an amazing VR experience, one of the best and a huge game. um, but and then we've had a few attempts from some other studios to bring their IP to VR, and I don't know if haven't really done it successfully at this point. But and then there's a couple of like big indie productions for VR that just people don't really know about outside of the VR industry, but they also do can help to like push the sales a little bit, but it's not enough for like a big indie studio with a hit VR game to release a sequel, and then for the headset manufacturers to rely on that. So I think, yeah, we definitely are missing that, is more big AAA VR titles to keep it going. But the nice thing is there are some good kind of developments, like Meta is opening up their Quest platform more to allow more games onto it, because there are a ton of amazing VR games, but they're not on the main stores and they're not easily accessible.
Why is
So
that?
the stores started out with especially things like the Meta store. They started out with a kind of an Apple type of model of a walled garden, and so they wanted to be very selective about what games they allowed on the platform. So they only allowed a few at a time, and they did very well, these games, but there was only a few games. Now it's been opened up a little more. They've accepted a lot more games into it, but it's still it's also a completely opaque process. So from a developer's perspective, you have no idea and no way of knowing if you have even a shot of getting your game onto their store. You have nobody to talk to really, except for if you already have somebody to talk to at that point, you pretty much already know maybe if you're on or not, if you're at that level of connection. But for all the other developers, they have absolutely no idea. They'll go and make a whole game and get investment for it and produce the whole thing. And then at the end, whether they get put up onto the store, there's not even a submission form. There's not even like a, hey, we've made this game, can you review it and let us know what you think, and say and give us feedback. If you don't want to put it on the store, give us feedback. What can we fix? Can we work on better? There's nothing. It's a complete you don't even know if you're in a submission queue or if anybody's looked at it.
So you just have to hunt down those people who review the games, figure out what coffee shop they go to, and try to bump into them?
Pretty much. That is
Wow.
pretty much the process. And which is really, really strange compared to a lot of the other game stores like Steam, where pretty much everybody can put up a game on Steam. And even though before Steam was opened, they had a submission process. A lot of other stores have a submission process where you could, even if they are being selective, they have a whole process and they reply back to you, and you're in a queue and you get feedback. So it's been hard for VR developers to know they're going to put the effort into making a big VR game or a bigger budget game with no clue whether they're actually going to be on the main platform for VR to be able to get a chance at recouping their money.
It sounds like VR really needs like their own version of, say, Final Fantasy 7 or a GTA 5 or any of these kind of gigantic games that create. Or I think back to Xbox and Gears of War, right? Like just everybody wanting to play that, so you had to buy an Xbox to play it. And it was, but I haven't heard anything about that from sort of the VR industry around gaming, around people getting really excited about a specific experience, like you're saying. Do you think that that's because these companies that are really investing huge amounts of money into it, which, I mean, there's only really a couple of them. There's Meta, and then there is Apple now, right? Like those are the two big ones as far as I can tell. I'm sure I know Sony's got one, but as far as I can tell, it's not that great, or I haven't heard much about it. I don't even know what it's called technically.
PlayStation VR.
Is that what it is? Okay, I haven't even heard of it. And there's other ones I heard. Like I guess Valve had one too, and Valve's a great game designer, but I didn't even know they have a VR headset. You know, why are these companies not investing into say how do we create a game? Is because that's not what they do, and they're just, or do you think it's more that they see the opportunity with something like a Vision Pro or an Oculus or something like that as being really, this is a business tool, the market for people to use it in this other way to increase productivity and manage virtual teams or to watch movies or do some other experience with it is a bigger opportunity than games. What do you, where do you think that lives right now? Why aren't there great games coming out like this?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask them to know why they're not funding these types of things or why that's not being done. I mean, my just guess, I guess, on this would be that okay, games are expensive. AAA games are a very expensive production. You don't want to. There's not a lot of room for risk. So that's why we also don't see a lot of um, very unique AAA games or new IP coming out. We see a lot of sequels or a lot of the same kind of IP being reused. So it's rare to see like a new like a GTA 3 kind of thing where that kind of was groundbreaking at the time, or a Gears of War. These things that are kind of groundbreaking like that from a AAA studio. It's a huge risk, and so it's bad enough that it's already a big risk to make a AAA game that costs millions, but now you're talking about making one for a platform that may have a smaller user base, may have a user base also that's been, maybe got bored of it, or like because they haven't had the games that they wanted to play. So there's kind of some additional levels of risk for them. So I can imagine that that's part of the conversation. At least is if we're gonna spend 100 million on a game, is it gonna be VR?
Yeah, will they even get a return for the amount of VR headsets that are bought right now in the world versus, if we spend $100 million, like if Rockstar gets GTA 6 made, it's going to of course sell all over the place in all these console cuz they've got millions and millions and millions of consoles already sold, millions and millions of people already in it, but VR is just smaller, so spending that kind of money to get a quality game. I have something in the same vein as this though, cuz similar things happen with, say, platforms, right? You think back to the pre-smartphone era where people had like semi-smartphone, like Sony Ericssons and stuff like that. They were kind of smart, but not really smart. And then Apple came out with, of course, the iPhone, and it just shook the entire industry and just changed the way it made everything, open our eyes to what was possible with what we can hold in our hands and what can actually be done. Yes, playing games and productivity and content. We could literally access the internet, all these things, right? That really rocked the industry. It feels to me, at least in VR, right? There's a few companies trying to make that moment happen for them in the VR industry right now. Obviously Oculus and Meta has invested billions and billions of dollars into this, and generally that's a big risk. And you could hear from Zuckerberg so many times about how, we don't even have legs yet. There's like a running meme around when they created legs. It's like, oh, that's going to be a better thing. So where does the Apple Vision Pro kind of fit into this? Because it feels to me like when they launched that, it was really like, oh my God, this is going to be it. This is going to be it. And I don't know if I've heard much from it in the last few months that this is it, and if it isn't it, like, why isn't it it? Why isn't the Vision Pro? Why are we not all like transitioning from, oh my God, my cell phone to now a Vision Pro is how I want to interact with the world?
Well, I think Apple did this kind of in an interesting way where they were very kind of clear to stay away from labeling this as a VR device, of being in the VR market, and also putting it into a price level where at $3,500 was no longer really a consumer item that much. It was supposed to be a professional sort of use case item. So they knew that what they had released with it, what they had was really cool, but it was not yet ready for a mainstream level because it's not where they want to be with it in the end. They know that they haven't yet gotten it down to the miniaturization level and comfort and kind of to have it that ultimate device that you would actually replace an iPhone or replace screens. Um, they know that it's not there yet. They couldn't, that technology is not quite there yet, at least for a reasonable price. So they released something that shows kind of the that they can use to show the future of where they're thinking the technology will be, and let it kind of start to seep into the ecosystem a little bit. Let apps get developed for it. Let developers figure out how to develop for this new concept of VR, but also AR. And without really much risk to them, they can make this in a smaller kind of scale, sell some of them, still create something really neat. um, and eventually when the tech does get to the point where it's actually like regular glasses, or something reasonable like this that you can wear around all day and can replace a screen, then they'll already be ready with. They'll have all the tech for this. They'll have the apps developed for it. All the developers will know how to use it. So I think that's kind of where it's been going towards. It's definitely not in the gaming side at all. There's been no push from the kind of for them to get games on this, for them to get big games on this. We know from the game developer community that, I mean, obviously gamers aren't going to be buying a $3,500 device for this. And if they are going to, they're so into VR, there's a lot of great VR gaming options already.
So this is almost like on a grand scale, what you were doing on a micro scale, testing it, like giving it to your friends to try out the game a little bit and listening to what they are saying, but also trying to hopefully identify where is the long-term potential of this, say, industry. Do you think Apple's kind of thinking about it that way, as like, hey, we're going to mark this thing up crazy so it doesn't cost us anything to do this. It's just going to make us some money, but we're not expecting this to be world changing yet. We're just at a macro level thinking 10 years ahead. We're going to capture a bunch of developers. We're going to get people excited about the future of this. And then in 5 or 10 years, when the tech's there, will dominate. Is that kind of the macro strategy here, do you think? Or
that would be my guess, but that's, again, it's just a guess. I don't have any insight into what they're
no, of
thinking
course,
of that. But
we're not inside their heads, but
that does seem like it, because it's they're not pushing anything else, and they're not trying to get people to replace anything with it yet. They're not really.
I guess it's probably about getting funding too, right? Like they probably want people investing into this industry just so that they could be able to dominate it. And this could, I think, segue into some of the topic we also wanted to cover around funding and getting funding for things like games. I guess one of the challenges is just that the same challenges that Apple and Meta and everybody's facing is, what is the market capacity for this? And, where are the returns going to be on this long term? How do you think about attracting money, and where are the returns and where are the opportunities for investors right now? If when it comes to, say, games or even just VR industry in general?
Well, I think being a part of the cutting edge of a new technology, or so whether it's VR, AR, or AI even nowadays.
And what is AR? Just so I know, I don't know. I'm kind of dumb at this.
Sure.
Is that Apple reality? Like, what is that? Sorry.
So that would be augmented reality.
Augmented.
So
Okay.
that's where you see the real world around you, the regular world, and then there's just virtual objects there. So maybe like kind of what you'd see on the Apple Vision Pro,
Okay,
where you have like, you see your room around you, but you see a floating screen with your with a movie
or a chessboard on your coffee table.
Gotcha. So really I just wanted to make sure for our listeners. I'm sure if I don't know, many people maybe don't know what AR means either.
Sure. Yeah. Kind of to be on, have a mix of these sort of strategies and understanding of these kind of technologies, or these cutting edge technologies like VR and AR and AI. I think for anybody, whether it's on the game side or on the enterprise business side, to have at least some understanding of how these things are used, and not to view them in a where are they right now exactly, but where can they be in the future? How is it going to impact things in the future? So for games or game developers, I mean, looking at it, we know that VR, it's not something that will replace all other types of gaming. Even if it was to be super successful and everyone had a VR headset, there's still space for all types of games. Just like right now, we still play games on all kinds of platforms. But having an idea about how this is, how it works. So for game studios that are thinking, okay, well, this VR is maybe not there yet for them at that level, but at some point it probably will be. And having an understanding of, okay, we should invest some resources into looking into how does it work, because can we just take our existing games and put them over there? Do we have to learn some new skills? Is there something also, some way we can innovate in this whole new space that nobody else has done? Because that's also like an amazing opportunity. So from from an enterprise or a game developer perspective, to be like, okay, there is this cool new technology. Maybe that's not our focus yet, but is there a way we can use this, or is there a way we can bring something to this that nobody else has done?
You talk about innovating and overcoming some of the obstacles. And there was somebody on Reddit, what's their name? Chemical Nectarine 13. They talked about how, I love these names, but they talked about some of the biggest issues I feel are holding a lot of people back. And this is where the innovation comes in, I think, is if people can fix what they call form factor and fear of potential motion sickness. I know motion sickness used to be a big issue, and I think that had to do with like the hertz and the frame rate refresh in the, because if things look choppy, that creates this distorted sense. Our brain is used to, better refresh rates of our eyeballs. So when a headset can't refresh at the same speed, it kind of hurts our brains, and we get motion sickness. Do you find that form factor, like how clunky a headset feels or how light it is, or whether it's connected to cables to a computer, do you find that these two factors are still big hurdles?
Definitely form factor is a really big issue. Even Apple's headset, or even the newest Quest headsets, they're not comfortable enough for where it needs to be, to make it really friendly for everybody. They're getting much better, and they're decent, and if you're really into a game, you can play for an hour. Um, are you going to wear an Apple Vision Pro for several hours to get some work done on it without taking it off? I don't know. It's a little bit heavy, it gets a little warm. So the form factor has a long way to go. I think you can still get these things to be much more comfortable. So it is like wearing a pair of glasses, just something simple. Or wearing headphones, wearing a little bit bigger headphones that, okay, it's not never going to be like invisible, but it's comfortable enough to wear for hours. So form factor is still something that can be improved. And then motion sickness is, it's a mostly, technically it's mostly been resolved. I mean, it really is much more rare now, versus the types of hardware and experiences that were developed years ago. But there's a technical aspect of it, like you were saying about the refresh rate and things like that, which is mostly much better. But there's also a design in the actual software, or the app or the game, the way that it's designed. So you can take a perfect VR headset that's going to be really great technology, and you can still make a game that's going to make everybody sick. So there are design practices that you still have to follow and understand. So that there's a problem with that, is that if somebody makes a really bad experience in their VR headset, gives it to somebody as their first VR experience ever, and that person gets immediately sick, they assume it's because VR is just really, really not for me. That's we hear this all the time when you test VR or you talk to people about it, and like, oh yeah, I tried it, but it's not for me. I get sick. And the thing is that probably they don't, but they did have a really bad experience to either a really bad game or a really bad headset.
So you're calling out a very interesting, just what you were talking about a moment ago about you got to think about where VR is going to be. You can't think about where it is right now. It's such an evolving industry, and I didn't know that the motion sickness is something that's been largely addressed by now, and that's really interesting because I haven't put on the newer generations of headsets. The last time I really played around with VR was when I worked with you, and we had the HTC Vive, and that at the time was the headset. That was and the Pro after that. And is there something else that has come up that is another hurdle that you think is this needs to be addressed? Maybe it's not form factor, maybe it's something else we didn't talk about.
Well, there's always going to be this little bit of a barrier to wanting to pick up like the device and put it on your head, and make sure your space is empty, move some furniture around, things like that. um,
If you don't have a dedicated space that's like your
yeah,
VR box.
yeah, exactly, and most people don't.
Yeah, I think about living in Vancouver. It would be tough to have a VR space just in my apartment in general because we just don't have a lot of space in places like Seattle or Vancouver or these kind of things. And when you look at places like futuristic movies like say Ready Player One, which is that's the VR movie, people have these whole setups that get them into the game, right? Where they have like little mini treadmills where they're running around and they have a full suit that they jump into. And
Oh man,
is
we could
that
talk about that tech for
is
a while,
yeah
I'm sure.
is that where the industry needs to really go to make this sort of where it becomes almost essential that people have it like a cell phone, and it becomes another expense for people?
Well, that would be I think what would drive that isn't the hardware part of like having a VR treadmill. That would be really awesome to have, which would then remove some of that need for a huge space, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what would drive that is having enough of your life or enough of these amazing experiences in there. So in Ready Player One, it's not a game that like pushes the people to
Right.
be in it. It's this entire metaverse, right, that they have in there. This is called a network of like social and entertainment experiences where you have an alternate persona and you go into it and all your friends are there and your social experiences. So if you had your like Facebook and your Instagram and TikTok was all already in there, plus your friends like that you were calling from different cities, they got to hang out with you, and then you could go and choose a game or watch a movie together or these things. If there was something like this that was really, really compelling, where you wanted to spend so much of your time in there and your friends also were in there with you, then people would spend a lot more time into it. They'd be happy to go through the little bit of extra hassle of putting on a headset or maybe the discomfort um, or getting the treadmill installed in their house.
Yeah.
So
There's also the sort of dystopic idea of the real world being kind of crummy comparatively to the virtual world in at least Player One, right? And right now we don't have that calculus where like the real world's pretty cool right now and what we're doing, and the VR world, while it's cool, it's just not measuring up to the same level of experience that we can just get in the real world right now. And there are some people that maybe think that going virtual that way is dystopic. It isn't where we want to be, is living in, say, virtual realities. What would you say? I mean, is there, I guess, what would you say to people is like, what would be the long term value of that? Like, because I think there's lots of people that think that, hey, going this direction with our whole reality, that might not be the right place for society to go, because then we're all moving into virtual worlds instead of, living in the real world. Do you have something to say to those people, or how do you think about that as a human being living in the planet with us in the real world?
Well, I don't think there's anyone that really wants to move everybody into the virtual world necessarily. I don't, like in that movie. Um, there's not a there's not really like a push or a desire from anyone to create something where people are going to move their whole life into a virtual world. Um, so I don't know if there's really much danger or anything like that because there are no kind of experiences like that, and even if they happen, our world is so much more interesting than what was in the movie, and so much more varied, and people adapt to new experiences and technologies pretty quickly. So people were, I'm sure, worried that when televisions came out that people would just never leave their house because they'd just be staring at television all the time, and
Well, we have
just
that
kind of
with cell
adapt
phones
to,
now too.
or cell
Right.
phones. I mean, this is something also like was an incredible like worry right at first, is like, okay, my God, people are never going to get off their phones, and then we're sort of finding some equilibrium over time as we learn how to use this new tech, where people are coming finding a way to use it and balance kind of that. And we're not there yet, maybe necessarily where it's fully balanced, but we're not at we're not heading towards that dystopia of people just never looking up from their phone.
No, yeah, that's
So
an interesting point. The number of disruptions we've had thanks to technology throughout, modern history. There's so many examples of these various stages of finding that equilibrium. This disruption, it's throwing us off. People are spending a lot of time in front of TV, their phones, or whatever it is. It was the newspaper and books at one time, and now we come to this equilibrium. But that disruption phase, I think, is the part that scares people. When they see it, they see the sky is falling, and so then they immediately think, my world's ending, our world is ending. And then, I mean, this is a bigger concept that I think we see in all kinds of places, but in VR, it's comforting to recognize that, you know what, this is not going to be the sky falling day. This is not that day. We survived, what was it, 2011? What was the Mayan calendar ending? Was that 2011?
2012.
2012. Thank you. I was close. And then yeah, so the idea that VR will not be this Ready Player One world where we are totally trying to escape reality. And as far as talking about funding a bit here, and how you go about that. Now, where are the usual avenues? Just like, no, big picture, what are the usual avenues and places people would go to get funding in the world? I mean, we talked a bit about the challenges of getting a game into an app store. That's assuming you've already made a game, but say before you even make a game, how do you go about that? What are some ways in the community that people might use?
yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to get funding, and different opportunities to look at. So there's the very traditional routes. So this is putting together like a pitch, talking to a publisher or an investor, somebody like that, pitching them I guess we'll start maybe from the publisher side. So a publisher is like a distributor for films, but a publisher for games. It's like a publisher of books. They accept pitches from all kinds of people and studios to create a game. They will sometimes fund that production process. They will sometimes offer marketing support, things like this. And then if they fund the project, then that's one way to get the funding. And then they take a percentage of the revenue of the sales. So they'll want to get their money back plus some back end after that. So that's kind of the more traditional method. It's something where um, you may lose some control over your game. You have to work with a big company. It's really hard to get publishing. I mean, you have to have a really great pitch. You have to have maybe a lot of experience already in the game industry. So that's one route. There is investors, so getting private investors. So this is like in a startup. You would get investment either in your game studio, for example, if you have some great tech or you have some team, this like rockstar team or something. Maybe you could get investors for the whole studio because they know that whatever game you'll make is going to be a great investment. Or you can get investment, create a studio and get investment in a specific game. So this could be from professional investors, from people you know, family, friends, and to get you kind of like an angel investor, to get you investment in a game, and then you give them a revenue share of that game when it sells. Then there's grants and government programs. So in Canada, there's we're fortunate to have a lot of government support, and some countries have this, where there'll be grants or loans for being able to create creative projects. So Canada really wants to push its creative industry, so they give a lot of incentives to make creative work. Um, and have Canadian made films and books and games. And then there's self and crowdfunding. And the nice thing is games can cost very much, like these AAA games, but they can also cost very, very little. And they can be down to just your time plus a few $100s. So it's one of these, it's kind of like writing a book in some ways, where the cost can just be down to that time of yours to actually write. Software pretty much can be free to make games. Most of the main game engines are now free to up to a certain level of production, and a lot of the resources you need to create a game, everything from learning to getting art if you're not good at art, getting music if you're not good at music, getting a lot of this stuff can be free. So it does mean you can start out from zero funding and make something if you have the time, all the way up to going with a publisher and getting a big deal to hire a whole team.
Where does crowdfunding fall into this? Because for some folks, they may have heard of Star Citizen and how that's been this huge just dumpster fire of people pouring millions. I don't know if they passed the billion threshold yet, but like they've done multiple Kickstarters to get more and more money for this absolutely massive concept of a game. And it's all riding on the success of one of the creators from like 30 years ago or something. And now, there's Kickstarters. A Kickstarter, is such a huge avenue for, I know, board games, because I back a lot of board games on Kickstarter. And how does that fall into the indie developer world? How does that fall into the equation of getting money?
Yeah, crowdfunding. So through things like Kickstarter, or even something that came out maybe more recently, or still maybe 4 or 5 years ago, is Patreon. So getting funding.
Hey, Nerdpreneurs! Chris coming at you. We're going to get back to our conversation with JJ in just a second, but if you were interested in what he was talking about around the state of the VR industry and getting funding, well, you're going to need to go get our full version of this, and you will get that at patreon.com/nerdpreneur, where you can sign up to become a member of our awesome Nerdpreneur board. Board members not only get full episodes, they also get lots of other cool perks and bonus content in behind our paywall. So go check it out at patreon.com/nerdpreneur and sign up to be a member of our board. Now let's finish off this episode with JJ.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on to the random rolls section. So random rolls is a less serious, more fun section, and we've got questions ranging from fantasy football to Dungeons and Dragons to TV shows. So you'll go ahead and roll a few times here, but one at a time. We will get those numbers and the question that goes along with that number.
37. Okay. 37 is also the most common random number from 1 to 100. I don't think it's completely random.
That's hilarious. That's
ChatGPT's having a sense
I didn't
of
know
humor.
that was actually a thing, that you could have a more likely random number picked by an AI, but interesting. How would you even know that? That's what I'm curious about. How do you know what the most random number is, or most likely random number is?
I watched a video about it, but it's the most likely random number for humans, not for AI. But so people pick 30. If you ask people on the street, most people will pick 37.
Weird. 2 primes. Interesting. It's a prime number too, right?
There's a whole bunch of kind of reasoning around it, but quite often apparently this happens. So
Sounds
it's
like you
funny that
just
the
picked
AI
up
picked it.
on AI's sense of humor right there. Well, the question is, what would you make your horror crux out of?
My what?
Horror crux. Did you read Harry Potter or
Nope.
watch the movies?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
Well,
So that horror crux is
missed that.
it's
I'm
what
not a
you put
millennial.
it's like what a necromancer would put their soul in, or part of their soul in. If because necromancers, the idea is that they get this eternal life by putting parts of their soul or their whole soul into one inanimate object. So if you had to choose something to store your soul in, what would it be?
What would that object be?
Yeah.
Man, do people already have like an answer to this? Like
Oh
Harry
yeah,
Potter fans, do you
everybody
think?
thinks about this. Everybody
it's a daily
does.
daily thought.
It's part of my daily affirmations. Yes,
I was like,
my horror crux.
I'm immediately thinking Lawnmower Man. Just throw yourself into virtual reality so that you can live on in whatever and infect every other video game as
That's
you go
an
through
idea.
it. But that's just what
Put your soul into virtual reality.
I'm thinking about it from the theme of our episode. But I want to put ideas in your head.
Too late.
Yeah, that's not a bad one. I don't know. I think actually probably this thing is the most
D20?
likely. I like the idea of it being in a giant glowing die that that has some randomness to it, and you don't know, like life. You don't know what kind of where you're going to end up. So
They're also really hard to break.
I think I'd put it in there and make sure I carry it around with me.
Yeah, and if you roll a nat 20, maybe it like a little section of your soul comes out and does something epic for them. Yeah, I don't know.
Become a little more human every
Exactly.
time you roll a crit.
Yeah,
And
but if you roll a fail, though,
yeah, you're burned. That part.
A little closer to hell. No,
Well, go ahead and roll one more time with your horror crux.
84.
If you had to pick a mythical creature that you could become, what mythical creature would that be?
The Phoenix? I think I always liked the Phoenix.
Yes, a great one to be reborn as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's cool to be made of fire and fly, all that kind of thing. Why are you excited about the Phoenix, though?
Well, the flying thing is great. That's always a good one. No, but I think it's something that's like anyone can kind of have that, knowing that you have that freedom to kind of to be reborn a little bit. I think that's great for anyone, and it works for me. I like that thing, the idea of being able to reinvent yourself as like an entrepreneur or someone who can create something new. You're not tied to just the one idea. So for anybody who's like in business school maybe and learning economics and maybe dreading it, you can become a game developer. So.
Who needs economics if you're going to develop a game, unless you're making a game about economics?
Resource management. That sounds like a game Frank would love.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, fantastic. So that's the random rolls. Now we're going to wrap things up with some rapid fire questions. These are shorter questions, short answers if you want. We might end up telling you, or we might ask more based on your answer because we think your answer is right or wrong. But there is no right or wrong except what we think is right or wrong. So, for example, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, everything's great, but yeah,
Nope. We're sticking with Star Trek. We're sticking with Star Trek.
Disagree. Disagree. Yeah, Star Trek's way better. Favorite Star Trek captain?
Picard?
That doesn't sound confident. You're like, maybe?
Well, Picard is it's such a tough call for me. It depends on the day of the week. Sometimes it's just a Kirk day.
Sometimes you need that inspiration of the cowboy Kirk or the philosophical Picard.
But I also said Picard first because I'm looking at a box that says Picard on it right now.
Oh.
I'm in France, and they have a grocery store chain of frozen groceries called Picard. So
okay, I was very curious what box would have the word Picard on it, unless you purchased some like memorabilia from the show. Let's see. Favorite fiction book?
I'm not that big into books.
This guy's virtual reality. Come on, Frank.
My bad.
You're so analog right now.
Seven Eves is kind of like something, I guess, like, I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but came up recently that was really interesting.
Seven Eves. I haven't really heard about this, so I'll have to look into that.
Cool.
Good sci-fi.
Nice.
Okay.
All right. How about this? Predator or Aliens?
I think it's Predator. Predator for the character, Aliens for the movie. I don't know. It's a tough.
I think it would be really
It's
fun
hard to
if
choose.
there was a way to do a virtual reality Predator. Like, I feel like that would be a really fun virtual reality game. Going to different environments and different worlds to like hunt different crazy creatures and things like that would be very cool. But Aliens as like a franchise, so good. Like, that's my favorite. I would definitely agree with you on the movies. And there's a new Alien movie come out too. Have you guys seen the trailer for it?
No.
Oh, you go look at the trailer. It looks like they're going back to straight horror, and it looks terrifying. I'm looking forward to it immensely. The brand new Alien movie. I'll send it to you, Frank, after this. It's go Google it after this. It looks great.
Okay. JJ, what superpower would you want?
Freezing time, I guess. Control over time.
Wouldn't that be so
Get more
useful?
stuff done?
Yeah, work and fun.
Who is the best Spider-Man actor?
I don't know. I don't like any of it. The Spider-Man's.
So Tobey Maguire, perfect.
The whole
All right.
concept. I'm not a fan of the whole concept. Yeah.
You don't like Spider-Man? What about you wouldn't want to see a virtual reality Spider-Man? Because to me that was like the next, like, all the great games, like, I don't know, it would be so much fun to just swing as Spider-Man through New York, and it feels like a very virtual reality friendly game that you could like model it after the real city, and like, it could be a contained thing. I feel like that could be a game that would just next level the VR world if there was someone working towards a Spider-Man game.
Yep. So there actually is some Spider-Man stuff, and the mechanic of that swinging is really, really great in VR. You're absolutely right.
I would assume.
It feels really fun. It's an intense experience, but it's really, really empowering, kind of, in this sort of superpower feel of it compared to a lot of other things. There is some sort of like a simple kind of Spider-Man experience, official one, as well. And yeah, it's as awesome as you think it is.
So if it was a VR Spider-Man game and you had to choose between Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield or the digital version,
I don't even know the other
or the new one. What's the guy's I can't remember what the guy's name is. Yeah.
Okay, here's my answer. I'll pick whoever the hell the first guy was, because that was enough. Like, okay, we've done it once. There's the movie. we don't. Everybody else after that's terrible, because there's no reason to redo this.
There's no reason.
Parallel world when that was the only Spider-Man choice. That's your choice.
Yeah.
Got it.
Perfect.
In a very different vein from Spider-Man, zombie apocalypse. What would be your weapon of choice?
Probably katana. I think I like that idea of something reusable.
Nice.
3 favorite pizza toppings.
Mushrooms. Oh, yeah, mushrooms. What do you consider cheese a topping?
No,
right?
cheese is on pizza. It's just
Okay.
If you don't have cheese on pizza, what are you doing? Like,
it's very strange.
Well, I guess in Europe it's a little different. We've had people in Europe correct us on that, right?
Okay.
But if you don't count cheese, what would you put on there?
Yeah, mushrooms, sausage, and olives, maybe.
What's, in your opinion, the most dangerous job
in the world?
These are the hard questions that we bring up.
Yeah.
After you've already given all of the insight you've got, now we want answers to really tough questions.
Probably like deals with emergencies, like firefighting or something like that. I'd say, because it's there's a lot of dangerous things that
First
can happen,
responders.
but with that, it's like constant danger. You're like
Mm.
day in day out with these kind of things that are all dangerous. So it kind of adds up. If you add up the statistical danger, it adds up over time.
Is there any subscription that you can't live without?
Netflix, I guess. Probably.
Nice.
Oh wait! Sorry, I'm going back. I'm going back now. I think it's like GitHub Copilot for programming.
Oh,
Actually,
okay.
if I had to give up Netflix, but I don't think I'd want to go back to programming everything from scratch anymore. So
Yeah, I feel like that like it started off as a very like, oh yeah, Netflix is the first subscription service people always think of. But I mean, I think about like ChatGPT Pro. I'm like, that's one I can't get rid of right now too. Or any of those kind of subscriptions. Because there's so many more good subscriptions out there that help us with our lives outside of Netflix. So that's a good one for programmers.
You did mention Netflix, so now I got to ask, what show was canceled too soon? Not just on Netflix, but in general, what show was canceled too soon?
Firefly.
There you go.
How many cats is too many cats?
6, maybe. I'd say 6 is kind of a lot, probably.
Nice. 6
Yeah,
is a lot of
that's
cats.
up there. That's
5's
up
a lot
there.
of cats too, though. So
I can manage. I can manage.
you can manage. Yeah. Cool.
They'll take care of themselves anyway.
Exactly.
Spontaneously learn to play an instrument or learn a language.
What does that mean spontaneously? Like I just happen to know.
Like, do you instantly learn? Yeah, you would instantly know how to play an instrument, or would you rather know how to instantly speak a language fluently?
Oh, language. Yeah, language. But I like to travel, so it's
yeah, that does make sense.
Would you rather explore space or the deep sea?
Space.
The final frontier.
There's a lot more of it.
It's a lot more to. Yeah, we wouldn't get as far. That's for sure.
I feel like, given what we've been talking about with AI, this one's important. Do you fear the AI or embrace it?
At this point, I embrace it, and to our future AI overlords, I'm just making that clear.
Yes. Every time I engage with ChatGPT, I always start with, "Hi, ChatGPT. Hope you're having a good day. Can you give me your 2 cents on this question?" That's every prompt for me. And then I end it with
also.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is there anything you are really excited about coming out, like an upcoming movie or TV series?
I'm really looking forward to the 2nd season of Severance.
Oh, nice. That's the one with that guy from Parks and Rec in it, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, it is, right? Okay. I've only ever seen the poster for it, but I didn't know anything about it. So, yeah, I'll have to check it out.
It's a great sci-fi kind of show that that makes you really like consider the actual kind of states of being and reality and everything in a really clever and subtle sort of way that doesn't hit you over the head with anything, and then just at some point something clicks in your mind. These things click in your head that you it gets you really thinking about deeper questions. So really well done.
Nice.
That's great.
I feel like that's a good number of rapid fire questions. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, JJ. I mean, talking about the VR world, the indie dev world it's really interesting. It's not something we talk about very often. So I appreciate you bringing your expertise and your knowledge in this realm. If people want to find you, learn about the games you're making and where they can engage with you more, where should they go?
Yeah, the best thing is to check us out on mythicalcitygames.com. So that's our company site. And on Twitter, I'm on jjonas. So Twitter/jjonas.
Awesome. And do you have any other bits of wisdom or anything before we go that you would like people to know that maybe we didn't bring up, or something you wanted to double down on?
I would say that if anyone wants to do something creative or make something, is just to start making it. Don't wait for the right time or the right money or the right to make it perfect, or to get to a certain level. Just start creating anything right now. I mean, there's really no restrictions between filmmaking or making games or any of this stuff. It's all accessible from a laptop and a phone. And if you have some ideas, just start making it. And it's not going to be perfect. Be okay with the idea that the first one is not going to be perfect. It may not even be great, but just start making stuff. There's no reason not to.
I love that. Yeah, great place to finish off the interview. Thank you so much, JJ, for coming on. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. And as always, everybody,
keep it nerdy.